I have conducted 11,000 skeletal intake assessments in my career. I say this not to establish authority, but to establish baseline. 11,000. Species ranging from the Davari, whose bones are hollow calcium reeds that snap under their own body weight when they fall, to the Sarathi heavy cast, whose femoral density registers near the upper limit of our scan array. I have processed prisoners of war, civilian detainees, research volunteers, and the occasional self-submitted specimen from a species trying to qualify for interstellar trade status. I know what a skeleton looks like when it has been used. I know what a skeleton looks like when it has been broken, and I know, better than most, that broken bones tell stories, if you know how to read them. I did not expect the human to tell me anything I had not already heard. The subject's name, as recorded in the intake manifest, was Dara Osi, rank, Staff Sergeant. The field unit that captured her had flagged the intake as routine. A recovered asset from a border skirmish, no unusual threat indicators on primary assessment. She had been cooperative during processing. She had declined the sedation offer on arrival, which we noted but did not flag. Some species simply dislike sedatives. She had sat in the intake chair without restraints at her own request, and the attending guard had agreed, because she was calm. Because she was small by the standards of what we expected of human soldiers, and because there was nowhere for her to go. I remember thinking, when I first looked at her through the observation glass, that she looked tired, not injured, not dangerous, tired in the particular way of someone who has been moving for a long time, and has only just been permitted to stop. Then I ran the deep scan. The preliminary render took approximately 40 seconds. My junior analyst, Petho Hall, was at the secondary station running species baseline cross-reference while I watched the skeletal model build itself layer by layer on the primary display, cortical shell first, then trabecular structure, then the remodeling overlay, flags old fracture sites by highlighting the callus formation in amber. Standard protocol. On a healthy, unremarkable subject, you see perhaps 2 or 3 amber points across a full skeleton. Minor stress fractures from activity, healed cleanly, no clinical significance. The display finished rendering. I counted the amber points. I counted them again. 31. Peth looked up from his station. He said nothing. He simply looked at me, and then back at the display, and then at me again. Sareth, our records officer, had entered the room by then to file the intake paperwork, and she stopped in the doorway when she saw the render. I told myself, remodeling artifacts, scan calibration noise, the human skeletal matrix might simply produce false positives in our imaging frequency. I told myself this while I was already pulling up the fracture site detail view on the first flagged point, left femoral shaft, mid-diaphysis, and finding that it was not an artifact at all, but a healed transverse fracture, clean-edged, callus formation, consistent with approximately 6 to 8 years of post-break remodeling, and with final cortical density at the healed site running measurably higher than the surrounding unbroken bone. I opened the intercom channel to the intake suite. I said, "Staff Sergeant Osi, I'm going to name some locations on your body, and I'd like you to tell me briefly what happened." She nodded. Just once. She did not seem alarmed. I said, "Left leg, upper portion, mid-shaft," she said. "Compot fracture, shrapnel, 7 years back," I said, and following that, she thought for a moment. "Splinted in the field. Finished the op. Proper setting about 4 days later." I closed that site detail and opened the next. 7 ribs, left side. Clustering here suggests a single event. ID adjacent, about 5 years ago. And following the event, a pause then. Extracted 2 personnel from the vehicle, called in the medevac, rode out in the second transport. I sat with that for a moment. I did not ask her to clarify. I moved to the next flagged site, right orbital floor. The bone here has healed with a slight anterior shift. There was a displacement. Blunt instrument. Training accident, believe it or not. She almost smiled when she said that. Almost 4 years ago. Vision was blurry for about 3 days, cleared up. Did you cease activity during those 3 days? We were in the middle of a qualification cycle. No. Peth had stopped pretending to work. He was watching the intercom speaker as though the answers were coming from somewhere he did not fully believe existed. I continued through the list. I will not record every exchange here. The full transcript is appended to the formal assessment, but I will note the shape of it. Because the shape is the thing that matters. The shape was this. Every fracture I named, she named an operation. Every operation she named, she had not stopped. There was a wrist, both radius and ulna healed asymmetrically, that corresponded to a river crossing under fire. There was a vertebral compression fracture, L2, mild but undeniable, that corresponded to a drop from a height she described as higher than intended. There were stress fractures in both feet that she attributed, with no particular emphasis, to a march she described only as long. 29 of the 31 flagged sites had a corresponding event. The remaining 2 she attributed to training, before her operational career had begun, and both had healed so completely and so densely that the fracture lines were visible only under maximum magnification. At some point during the middle portion of the interview, Sirith had quietly set down her intake forms. She was standing very still near the door. I did not look at her directly. When I finished the list, I sat for a while without speaking. Staff Sergeant Osi waited. She was patient about it. Not indifferent, not impatient, simply patient. The way someone is patient when they have been asked to wait many times before and have learned that waiting costs nothing. I said, I want to make sure I understand the sequence correctly. In the case of the femoral fracture, the first one we discussed, you completed the operation after the break occurred. Yes. Over what time period? About 31 hours from the break to extraction, on a fractured femur, was splinted. A field splint, yes. I pulled up the femoral site detail again. The healed bone was, by our density measurement, approximately 11% denser at the fracture site than the unbroken cortex on either side of it. I had seen this pattern before, mild, in other species, but not at this magnitude and not repeated 31 times across a single skeleton. The human body, it appeared, treated a healed fracture not as a repaired weakness, but as a reinforced one. It did not simply close the break. It rebuilt the site stronger than it had been. I had not known this before I ran that scan. I want to be precise about that. I closed the intercom. I said to Peth and Sereth quietly, run the species comparative overlay. I want to see where she lands on the density distribution. Peth ran it. The result appeared on the secondary display. Staff Sergeant Osi's overall skeletal density, averaged across the full structure, placed her in the upper quartile for humans, which was itself already elevated relative to most of the species in our database. But the 31 healed fracture sites individually placed her, at those specific locations, above the upper bound of what we had on record for any species of comparable mass. Sereth said very quietly, she's harder than she started. That was the accurate summary, yes. I filed the reclassification that evening. The form requires a threat assessment rationale, and I was careful with the language because I wanted whoever read it to understand the precise nature of the concern. It was not that the human's bones had broken. Most things break. It was not even that they had healed. Most things heal. It was that the record of 31 fractures was, functionally, a record of 31 moments when the standard expectation that a broken organism stops had simply not applied. Each site was a data point. Taken together, they were a pattern. And the pattern did not describe a soldier who had survived damage. It described a soldier for whom damage had become, over time, a kind of accumulation. An investment almost. Something the body absorbed and then quietly turned into density. I recommended reclassification to threat category 7. I noted that the assessment was based on skeletal record alone, and that I had not yet reviewed her cardiovascular profile, her neurological response data, or her documented operational history, beyond what she had provided verbally. I noted that if the skeletal record alone justified Category 7, full profile might require a category we did not currently have a form for. Then I closed the file. Staff Sergeant Osier was still in the intake suite when I finished. The guard had offered her a meal, which she had accepted. I watched her for a moment through the observation glass before I left. The way she sat, the way she held the cup, particular stillness of someone who was simply resting, because rest was available, and she intended to use it efficiently. She did not look like a Category 7 threat. She looked like someone who had been moving for a long time, and was for now content to stop. I suspected that was the most dangerous version of the two.